Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll examine a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin with Trump imposing global tariffs of 15% in response to a Supreme Court ruling striking down his Liberation Day tariffs in a 6-3 ruling that prompted a meltdown from our megalomaniacal man-child, who accused the court's 3 conservatives who rebuked him of being rhinos and its 3 liberals who joined them of being radical left lunatics. Joining us to discuss what the ruling does and does not do is Justin Wolfers, a professor of public policy and economics at the University of Michigan and a visiting professor of economics at the University of Sydney. He's also a research associate with the National Bureau of Economic Research, a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, a non-resident senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, as well as a research fellow with the Institute for the Study of Labour in Bonn, a research affiliate with the Centre for Economic Policy Research in London, an international research fellow with the Kiel Institute for the World Economy, and a fellow at CSF's IFO in Munich. Then we'll assess whether the arrest of former Prince Andrew might involve a plea bargain which could lead him to naming names, including Trump's, to avoid a jail sentence. Joining us is David K. Johnston, a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter and best-selling author of The Making of Donald Trump. A 13-year veteran of the New York Times, his latest book is The Big Cheat, How Donald Trump Fleeced America and Enriched Himself and His Family. He's also a professor at the Rochester Institute of Technology and the co-founder of DCReport.org, where his latest article we will discuss is The Ex-Prince and the President. Then finally we'll speak with Alexander Cooley, the former director of Columbia University's Harriman Institute for the Study of Russia, Eurasia, and Eastern Europe, and the Claire Tow Professor of Political Science at Barnard College of Columbia University. His books include Great Games, Local Rules, The New Great Power Contest in Central Asia, Dictators Without Borders, Power and Money in Central Asia, and Exit from Hegemony, The Unraveling of the American Global Order. And he has an article at Foreign Affairs we will discuss, The Age of Kleptocracy, Geopolitical Power, Private Gain. And before we begin at the start of this new year, which will culminate in the fateful midterm elections in November, polls already indicate MAGA Republicans will lose the House and possibly the Senate. But we're up against a Trump-Miller presidency already drunk with power, and they will do anything to stay in power, having already demonstrated their contempt for the United States Constitution with Trump's January 6, 2001 coup attempt. They see over half of the country as their enemy and have a private army of loyal thugs ready to round up critics of the regime they label as communist lunatics. As Trump cowers, the media and his cronies buy up the mainstream press, Background Briefing will continue to expose this malevolent regime's fascistic machinations, providing a daily insight into the news as a massive coalition of people power is mobilized to bring about an end to this nightmare and usher in a new era of reform not seen since Nixon departed the presidency in disgrace. To help save America's 250-year-old democracy, we need all hands on deck, and you can make a tax-deductible donation to help us do our part at backgroundbriefing.org/donate or at publictruthmedia.org. And thank you. And joining us now is Justin Wolfers, a professor of public policy and economics at the University of Michigan and a visiting professor of economics at the University of Sydney. He's also a research associate with the National Bureau of Economic Research, a non-resident senior fellow with the Brookings Institution, a non-resident senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, as well as a research fellow with the Institute for the Study of Labour in Bonn, a research affiliate with the Centre for Economic Policy Research in London, an international research fellow with the Kiel Institute for the World Economy, and a fellow at the CES IFO in Munich. Welcome to Background Briefing, Justin Wolfers.
Mate, how are you?
I'm well, and on Friday, the Supreme Court handed down a decision with 6-3. The dissenting votes came from, I guess, the MAGA justices, Alito, Thomas, and Kavanaugh. And in the majority opinion, Chief Justice Roberts said that Trump's tariffs, quote, would replace the long-standing executive-legislative collaboration over trade policy with unchecked presidential policymaking. Accordingly, the president must point to clear congressional authorization to justify his extraordinary assertion of the power to impose tariffs. He cannot. So this has been met with Trump saying the ruling is a disgrace, and he cursed these effing judges. What do you think? What do you think of the ruling,
mate? I'm not a lawyer. That's not really my my bailiwick. But a couple of things. The U.S. Constitution quite explicitly gives the power to tax to Congress, and a tariff is a tax. Very clear. There's no question about that. What happened over time is that Congress understood that Congress isn't very good at getting things done, so it delegated some of those authorities to the president. And sometimes it would be a very specific way. It would say, oh, if we're worried about national defense, then you're allowed to put tariffs that are relevant to that, and so on. What the president did is not use any of those authorities, but he had an untested legal theory. There's something called the Emergency Powers Act. And he said, this act, which literally does not use the word tariff, he said this act gave him the power to say there's a national emergency, and because of a national emergency, he's allowed to use tariffs. So there's two big problems there. One, does it give the president, is this Congress giving the president one of Congress's powers, despite the fact it didn't use the word tariff? The court basically held no. If Congress meant to give the president a power, it would have done so very, very, very explicitly. Even if that hadn't have been the story, there's still a second question, which is there actually a national emergency? This wasn't the basis of the decision today, but even if it had found the other way, there's this deep question. Trump claims we're in a national emergency because he does that every day, but his national emergency is the US was running a trade deficit, which it has done each and every day for the last several decades. So, you know, it seems like the logic of this makes sense. This was the sort of decision that people expected. But Ian, the most important thing I think for people to understand with all of that is simply this. The court didn't say tariffs are unconstitutional. It couldn't. Someone has the power to tariff. What it said is that right exists, but it exists with Congress. And so you hear we've heard a lot of messy rhetoric from the president, but in fact, the court is really just saying, yeah, the United States can have all the tariffs at once, but Mr. President, you should check in with Congress first, see if you can persuade some of those folks. And if you can't, well, maybe it's not such a good idea after all anyway.
But the Emergency Act that you refer to is the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act, known as IEPA. And previous presidents had only used that to impose sanctions, not tariffs.
Yes.
So that is a pretty obvious overreach, is it not?
Mate, if you and I were the judges, we probably would have written this decision a couple of months ago, maybe even a whole year ago. Because what we've just had is the most ridiculous carnival, which is someone has upturned all of the rules of international commerce over a year, threatened the US economy, threatened the Canadian economy, threatened the global economy, based on a set of powers that he never had. And it sounds like you and I probably could have guessed this a few months ago. So look, what happens if you have a trade war, but you weren't allowed to have it all along? I think we still get the scars, but we certainly don't get any wins out of it.
And it seems that the ruling targets Trump's August the 2nd of last year's what he called Liberation Day. And that doesn't mean that all tariffs are off, right?
No. Right. So this is a very important point. Recall a moment ago I said Congress had delegated several specific powers to the president. And so he's still allowed to use those. And the way to think about this is you can think about this as horizontal tariffs, tariffs that apply across a whole country. And that's what the Liberation Day tariffs are. Here's the tariff on Australia. Here's the tariff on the Heard and McDonald Islands. Here's the tariff on China. Here's the tariff on the European Union. Those were the tariffs that he was relying on the Emergency Powers Act. Those are the tariffs that are unconstitutional. Those are the tariffs that just plummeted to zero today. By the way, many of the tariffs on China were using the International Powers Act, but this time the so-called fentanyl tariffs, because he thought that fentanyl was coming from China and that was a national emergency. Those are also unconstitutional. You can also think about vertical tariffs, things that take a thin, well-defined slice of an economy that target a specific industry. For instance, steel tariffs. Those were using different legal authorities. Things like anti-dumping laws that sort of try to make sure that trade is fair. Things like national security exceptions. That was the argument over steel. Those are not up for debate. Congress gave the president those powers and the president can use them. The thing to realize is the president can no longer pick up the phone to any other foreign leader and threaten that their country will be targeted by tariffs. What he can do is say that he will try and use these other powers. Now, these other powers also have a lot of procedural guidelines. They're very slow and they're clunky by design because Congress never wanted the president to be doing what he's currently doing. The point, though, is this isn't the end of tariffs. Today knocks off 2/3 of the current Trump tariffs. They're going to start building the case industry by industry to apply a whole lot more tariffs. If you've been enjoying this remarkable soap opera, strap in because season 2 is just about to start.
So this means that he'll be using Section 232 of the 1962 Trade Expansion Act, right? He'll just use that with a vengeance.
There's 5 different authorities that he could use. The one that I think he will almost certainly use, probably, within days, is the one where he's allowed to say apply tariffs of, I think it's 10% for up to 150 days. But it's very limited authority. And so he'll probably do that, and then 150 days will end. My guess is then there'll be some sort of legal action, but as far as I can tell, that's it. Once you used your 150 days, you're done. Then there'll be other things based on anti-dumping, on national security, and so on, but they're all very finely tailored. They require investigations, a lot of paperwork, and who knows, they may just run out of puff.
But he did impose the tariffs under IEEPA on America's 3 largest trading partners, right? Mexico, Canada, and China. Is there any relief there?
Yeah, which is those tariffs today are illegal. Right. And so they're zero.
But given that he's got other tools at his disposal, will this, and there's a pattern known as TACO. Where do you think it stands? Is it likely to be back on again before we know it?
Right. So TACO is Trump always chickens out. The thing to notice, though, is he announced outrageously high tariffs, and then he did TACO to some degree. He did back off, and the actual tariff revenue he's raised has been far lower than the pronouncements that he's made, and that is because he has chickened out through time. This isn't a TACO moment. This is the Supreme Court saying, you can't do it. Those tariffs are zero. The one thing the president doesn't like is having his authority questioned, and that's the sense in which he will probably move forward with a bunch of industry-specific tariffs.
So in terms of refunds then, given that Costco sued Trump, so did Goodyear Tires, the Chinese electric vehicle BYD, etc., and the camera maker GoPro, what's the mechanism there and what's the likelihood of refunds?
So the court on Friday was conspicuously silent on this issue. So look, they basically said the tariffs from now on are zero, and I think there'll probably be other court decisions or government choices in order to figure out what to do with the fact that people paid taxes that were unconstitutional. It could be you just let it be and we're done. It could be that these firms end up successful in their suits and they end up getting a refund. Here's the thing that sucks about it, though. The tariff is not imposed directly on a consumer. Basically, if Costco has to pay a tariff to bring food across the border, Costco writes the check to the government. When Costco's costs go up like that, what it tends to do is raise the price. And I shop at Costco, so I paid higher prices. But because Costco so ultimately I ended up paying. But it's Costco that wrote the check to the government. So if Costco does succeed, it's Costco that's going to get a refund. I guarantee you Costco's not going to call me up and say, Justin, did you happen to buy some imported olive oil? Because I'd like to help you out with a little bit of a share of your check. So this will, if it happens, it'll help corporations, but not consumers. It'll just be a simple one-off payment. And if it doesn't happen, it's also not going to affect consumers. The consumer's not getting their money back.
Well, that leads to I think, an incredible failure on the part of the press to frame what's been going on with Trump in this second term. And that is, they keep referring to, today Donald Trump slapped X number of percent tariffs on China. Well, why didn't they say that he'd slapped a tax on the American consumer?
Well, mate, I have spent hundreds of hours on American TV and radio, and I've said that almost every time. I'll tell you, it is a mouthful to say it that way to defend folks in the press, but I think the more intelligent parts of the press actually did get the message through, and that's why the president is actually losing so badly in the court of public opinion on this tariff issue. Yes, there are those who want to obfuscate. The president is one of them and pretend that China is paying for these. They're absolutely not. There's a ton of evidence suggesting that they're not. And I guess you can probably learn how thoughtful someone is about these issues, partly from the language that they use.
But what's going on in Trump's head? I know that's a dangerous territory to explore, but still, he's obviously listened to, or he's certainly appointed a bunch of crackpots and cranks to head up HSS, RFK Jr., and Tulsi Gabbard in charge of our intelligence. She eats the toenail clippings of a guru that she puts in a blender with a banana. And then you've got this crazy fanboy of Trump's heading the FBI. There's a whole list of them. And on the economics, you've got Navarro. So is this Navarro's insanity that's been inculcated in his brain and that he can't somehow shake it? Or is this some incredibly cynical operation on his part just to wield power because it gives him unilateral power and he obviously likes that?
So I'm never going to tell you what's inside the president's mind. Partly I don't know, partly I happen to live somewhere else, partly I'm not a psychiatrist. What I do know is that the president has, for decades, including before he was ever in public life, made the case for tariffs. So as far as I can tell, it's a sincere belief. I can also tell you that it's not an unusual one. I teach Economics 101. Lots of untrained minds come in with the sorts of intuitions that the president has. Fortunately, this is a disease that one semester of careful study can cure. And most of my students, I think, come out with a different understanding of the world. And yeah, I think this is a moment where we might reflect upon the fact that once upon a time, one Economics 101 teacher somewhere failed at their job, and the world is paying a hefty price.
So in terms of this Supreme Court ruling then, what kind of price do you think the world is going to pay? Is it the relief that some are expressing, is that global? Is there really, given that he's still got other means of keeping tariffs on? How would you rate the global landscape? Are we to breathe a sigh of relief or to gird ourselves for the next round of insanity?
So two things are true. An enormous sigh of relief because it's clear that the president doesn't have the power to pursue the worst of his instincts. That's very, very good news. We should be pleased about that. What's also true is that he has other powers which are lesser, and we should anticipate that he's going to pursue those as well. So the madness isn't over. If you thought that Neighbours or Sons and Daughters was an amazing soap opera, this one's going to have no fewer twists or turns.
And I guess it's a political question to finish up on. Do you think that he's in any way wounded because he likes to wield power and he's basically, even though the Supreme Court gave him an extraordinary immunity, they've at least clipped his wings a little bit?
It takes us one step back from the president as king. This is the Supreme Court recognizing that, in fact, we have a Congress. The Congress has important powers and the president doesn't run the country by himself. So there's a narrow message there on tariffs. If you want to impose across the board tariffs, you need to go to Congress. There's a broader message there that the United States is not a monarchy. And hopefully the Supreme Court will continue to be there for us. But, for the president, it's going to prevent him from instituting his agenda. He would call that bad. I think his agenda is terrible. So therefore, I think that's good. If it prevents him from imposing terrible economic policies that would have cost him politically, maybe that actually ends up helping him. Who the heck knows? Politics is a funny business.
Absolutely. I thank you for joining us, Justin Wolfers.
Great pleasure.
And again, I've been speaking with Justin Wolfers, who's a professor of public policy and economics at the University of Michigan and a visiting professor of economics at the University of Sydney. He's also a research associate with the National Bureau of Economic Research, a non-resident senior fellow with the Brookings Institution, a non-resident senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, as well as a research fellow with the Institute for the Study of Labour in Bonn, a research affiliate with the Centre for Economic Policy Research in London, an international research fellow with the Kiel Institute for a World Economy, and a fellow at CSIFO in Munich. We're going to take a brief station break, back assessing whether the arrest of the former Prince Andrew might involve a plea bargain which could lead him to naming names including Trump's to avoid a jail sentence. Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now, David K. Johnston, a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter and best-selling author of The Making of Donald Trump, a 13-year veteran of the New York Times. His latest book is The Big Cheat, How Donald Trump Fleeced America and Enriched Himself and His Family. He's also a professor at the Rochester Institute of Technology and the co-founder of DCReport.org, where his latest article is The Ex-Prince and the President. Welcome to Background Briefing, David K. Johnston.
Well, good to be on with you again, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us. And there's a lot of reporting in the press about how the Europeans are doing something about Epstein's horrible behavior and those that collaborated with him in raping underage girls, etc. The Norwegians, their prime minister's in trouble. The royal family's in trouble. And the British royal family's in trouble, or at least the ex-prince is clearly in trouble, having been arrested on his birthday a few days ago. So a lot of people are saying, well, contrasting the action on the part of the Europeans with the inaction on the part of the United States. But is there any way, and I suspect there's not, David, of shaming Bondi and Blanche and Trump into doing something? They seem to be absolutely shameless.
They are 100% shameless. And no, there's no way to shame them into it. But all hope here is not lost because of the arrest of Prince Andrew on a charge of official misconduct, which theoretically could mean life in prison. There's going to be a bunch of pre-criminal trial action. That will include something the British government has already done, which is asked for unredacted material from the Epstein files, unreleased material from the Epstein files, relevant to Prince Andrew, not anybody else, except Jeffrey Epstein or anyone else he may have given state secrets when the former prince was a government employee as a trade negotiator for the British government. And apparently he told things to Jeffrey Epstein that allowed him to engage in one of his many market manipulations, using secret information to benefit himself. These investigations in Norway against the Prime Minister, against Prince Andrew in the United Kingdom, and evidently in some other places, there are indications of preliminary inquiries. They're going to result in creating a more robust public record about Jeffrey Epstein. And the defendants, if they become defendants, the Norwegian Prime Minister has been accused of gross misconduct, the former prince, etc., they're going to, of course, seek access to documents. And in the case of both Norway and the United Kingdom, we have formal agreements on the exchange of information in criminal proceedings.
But the key, though, you just alluded to it, David, is the unreleased files. There are 3 million files that were released and that they were heavily redacted and irresponsibly redacted. But there are 3 million other files, or pages at least, that the FBI scrubbed initially. And that has got both Ro Khanna and Massey extremely upset. And Bondi and Blanche are holding on to them. And clearly that's where the smoking guns are, right?
Absolutely. And let me tell you what you're going to hear before long from Pam Bondi or one of her people around her, Todd Blanche, most likely. Under American law, looking at an image of an adult in a sexual act of any kind with someone under the age of consent, just looking at the image is a felony. It's, I believe, a 10-year felony. Now, there's an exception, obviously, for law enforcement. You can't bring a case, after all, if you can't verify that evidence. So police who are on such cases and prosecutors can look at this, and juries can be presented with material in which you would expect some, blacking out of detail. And that's going to be the defense. The Trump administration at some point is going to say, everything else we're not releasing, we can't, because for you to look at it would be a crime. Well, my answer to that is members of Congress supervise the president. That's our system. The president of the United States, despite all the powers that have been added to the presidency in the last 75 or maybe 100 years, don't take away from the fundamental fact that Congress makes the rules, Congress has oversight, Congress decides how to tax, how to spend the money, and therefore they are, in effect, a policing agency on the administration. And they should be able to see these things. Now, right now, there are 4 computers the Justice Department has provided for members of Congress to go see materials. We also know that the Justice Department is capturing their keystrokes so that they know which questions, which interrogations members of Congress made in their searches. What did they look for? Which is a kind of spying and totally inappropriate. But this is simply, Ian, going to lead to more conflict, more litigation, and you're seeing Donald Trump's support erode pretty strongly because of all of this. And then finally, there is another trove of documents. When law enforcement executes a search warrant in the United States, they must leave behind a detailed receipt, and they must return all the materials or give certified copies of the materials. The only thing they don't have to return is contraband. So if it was drugs they found, they don't have to give you back. They just have to leave a receipt. Well, these photo images and videotape images that some of the women victims have said they know exist, presumably because they were told you're going to be filmed or we want you to make sure the camera captures you because this was an extortion racket. Those, while contraband under the law, have not been destroyed. It would be foolish for the administration to destroy them. The estate may have copies of these. Now, the Democrats haven't asked the estate for these materials. That's a strategic move. If they regain control of Congress, that's when they will go to the estate of Jeffrey Epstein and ask for documents like that. So I would expect sometime next January or February, you're going to see a demand for that. And at a minimum, we'll get receipts.
Right, but didn't Comey's daughter, Maureen Comey, when she was a federal prosecutor in Manhattan, and she defended the victims and brought Ghislaine Maxwell to justice,
right,
got a 20-year sentence. She supposedly had access to the compromised contents of Epstein's safe. Is that true?
Well, she absolutely would have had to do that in order to bring the case and to understand the case. She has not been called as a witness by the Republican majority in the House or the Senate in the relevant committees. And again, that's a strategic matter. The Democrats haven't been asking for her because they can call her when they are running the committees. I mean, remember, the committee hearings we've seen have been very skillfully, I mean, you got to respect these people's skill, have been skillfully manipulated by the Republicans, particularly Representative Comer of Kentucky, to make it appear that they are digging deeply into the Epstein affair when what they're really trying to do is run a protection racket for Donald Trump. The Clintons, for example, are going to testify shortly. Now, they bungled this thing when they were called upon to testify. They didn't successfully get out the message, hey, we're happy to come and testify any day of the week in public. And now large numbers of people believe, and I know this from social media that I get and people who email me and whatnot, large numbers of people believe the Clintons refused to testify and were being uncooperative, and that, of course, suggests guilt on their part, which is nonsense. But the effort by the Republicans has been, I think, really skillful at trying to protect Trump and dirty up anybody who might have damaging information about them. So the Democrats would be smart to keep pressing these issues, trying to keep public attention on this, but waiting until after January 3rd of next year, when presumably they will be in control of the House and hopefully the Senate, to then go full out on the Epstein files.
So what about the evidence from the victims themselves? For example, there was a victim called Katie Johnston who sued Trump, and she claimed that when she was 16 years old, he raped her and said to her, as she begged him not to rape her, he said, "I can do anything I want." She disappeared, and the case was dropped. You were mentioning the last time I talked to you that there's also evidence along those lines. What evidence is out there?
Well, a number of the now grown women have, under oath, sometimes using pseudonyms, told about what happened to them. One of them says that Trump demanded oral sex from her. She ended up biting him, and he hit her in the face. There's another one who says that Trump raped her when she was, I believe, 14, and said something along the lines of, "You should be glad it's Donald Trump and not some incompetent 14-year-old taking your virginity." All of these things are totally consistent with the Donald Trump I've known for almost 40 years and spent hundreds of hours with. That's who he is. And I think the real question that needs to be constantly pushed is, if this is a hoax, Mr. Trump, if this is all just made up out of nothing, why haven't you told the Justice Department, release every single reference to me, any images of me, any videotapes, any audio tapes of me, black out everybody else's name, put everything about me in the record? And I think the answer to that is quite obvious. Doing so would put him in legal jeopardy. There is no statute of limitations for child rape under the federal government's criminal laws, Title 18 of the U.S. Code. And so Donald Trump, if all the evidence comes out, faces the very real prospect of being prosecuted. And well, the Supreme Court has said a president may not be prosecuted after he leaves office for any official act. Rapes committed when he was not in office, rapes of children, other sexual assaults of children, those are not protected, nor are illegal acts to cover up and hide that evidence.
Well, it's hard to believe that he can dodge this bullet forever. What do you think?
I don't think he can dodge this bullet forever. I will tell you, Ian, I've been kind of surprised on some other programs I've been on that had call in or text in questions, that some people believe that even if it comes out that Donald Trump raped little girls, that the MAGA crowd will excuse that. The ones who claim to be Christians will say, well, he's asked for God's forgiveness and God has forgiven him. The thoughtless class in that group is going to say, well, that was a long time ago. He's not doing it anymore. It has nothing to do with his being president. Because we've had a really serious moral decline in this country. When I was exposing sham tax shelters that big corporations were buying and other misconduct by big corporations when I was at the New York Times, I actually quoted some prominent people about what they perceived in their fields, law and accounting, to be a major collapse, quite literally collapse of moral values in their professions. And that's part of what we're seeing here is this decline of moral values.
Well, the double standard is pretty extraordinary to think that the Republicans, particularly Lindsey Graham and others, went after, and by the way, Lindsey Graham was drunk as a skunk in meetings recently in Greenland, cursing and with foul language the Prime Minister of Denmark and the Prime Minister of Greenland. But I'm referring back to the Clinton impeachment. I mean, my God,
Yep.
Compared to what Trump is accused of doing, Clinton looks like a saint.
Well, I don't know if he looks like a saint, but he was dealing with a 22-year-old who is, after all, 4 years into the age of consent and who has never, ever held herself out, as having been coerced, goo-goo-eyed, yes, and naive and gullible, yes, but not being criminally attacked. Can we go back to Prince Andrew for just a minute about?
Yeah, I wanted to finish up on that because
Yeah.
of your article at DC Report, the ex-prince and the president. Let's go back to that and tell us how it connects to Trump and the Epstein case over here.
So the charges being investigated, not filed yet, but investigated, do not involve sex trafficking or child rape. They are about official misconduct involving trade secrets in negotiations over trade agreements. And that's a very serious crime under British law. They have, of course, the Official Secrets Act, which thank God we don't have in America. Because this is such a serious charge and has the potential, theoretically, of life in prison, Andrew and his lawyers are going to do everything they can to avoid any kind of prison for him. The king, his brother, has issued a statement that shows not one word of sympathy for his brother, that supports law enforcement, that uses his mother, the Queen's phrase, service and duty. And all of that can be seen cynically as the firm, as the British royal family is called, as the firm protecting itself. And there's an element of that, no question about it. But unlike Donald Trump, the head of state is allowing law enforcement to do its work clearly unfettered. So if he wants to protect his own skirt and family and maintain the monarchy, and that's the price for proper law enforcement, then that's the price for proper law enforcement. The other thing in the Prince Andrew case that matters is that he must be vulnerable or he would not have been cut out by the family. The king would not have taken away the titles. He can't take away his money. He's still an incredibly wealthy man, Andrew is. But taking away the titles and shunning him, and doing so before the arrest. I mean, clearly King Charles knew that there's really serious trouble coming, or he would not have acted to take away the prince's titles. That shows that there is a actual system of justice going on with this issue in the United Kingdom. That's not what's going on here. This is just a cover-up. And the New York Daily News, of all places, the other day said what you've heard me say, Ian, for many years, and that is the Trump administration is a criminal organization. It is involved in, taking money for clemency and pardons, not directly to the president, but through side channels, family members, business deals. They are taking care of friends. Apparently, we are paying for some of the old warehouses they want to turn into detention centers 4, 5, 6 times the market value of those properties. There's a federal law that covers that, by the way, and can result in prosecutions of the people involved in those deals. So bureaucrats and appointees who are doing Donald's work, they really need to think about what happens if we get out of the Trump dictatorship, restore our democracy, because they're going to go to prison, a lot of them. Not all of them, but a lot of them are going to go to prison. So in Prince Andrew's case, the only way he can get out of serious risk of prison is offering up other fish the British government wants. The big unknown is, does the British government want Donald Trump's, metaphorically, head on a pike? If they do, Andrew is almost certain to be in a position to hand him up. In addition, wherever he went, he had British taxpayer provided security. Now, when you do security for someone who is an office holder or a relative of an office holder, you are told to ignore any misconduct. Your job is to take care of the protectee, to make sure they are not kidnapped or harmed in any way. But they have to keep logs of where they were. They have to make reports. Many of them, no doubt, kept personal diaries because maybe there's a book that'll make them a lot of money in the future when they're no longer government employees. I think it's more than reasonable to believe that British law enforcement called in at least some of Andrew's security details and got them to answer questions. And if they could show that any logbook had been fudged to conceal misconduct, law enforcement now has a lever over those people. You filed a false report, that's a crime. We can get you fired. We may even be able to get you thrown in prison. They've worked their way up the chain of command very quickly, a matter of weeks, to get to the prince. What, if anything, does Andrew have to trade so that he doesn't lose his liberty? And to think that this, weak character is going to resolutely, like a mafioso, stand up and just take it, that's a fantasy. He'll collapse in a minute if he has competent Crown prosecutors or competent detectives questioning him.
Right. And of course they did question him on his birthday, and that in itself indicates that they're pretty damn serious. So
yes, and the fact that they arrested him with no notice, depending on which report you read, either 6 or 8 carloads of cops showed up with no notice to arrest him. That tells you how serious this is, because that's a signal. The signal being sent by the way that he was arrested was, hey, if you're somebody else out there who has a problem because of Epstein, you and your lawyers better come in now to make a deal, because we're not playing anymore. We're serious business here. And I assure you that every sophisticated criminal lawyer dealing with people around Andrew or people who've dealt with Epstein in either New York, Florida, or London has been on the phone to their clients saying, you need to come in and talk in person.
Well, David K. Johnston, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Glad to be with you. Take care, Ian.
You too. And again, I've been speaking with David K. Johnston, a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter and best-selling author of The Making of Donald Trump, a 13-year veteran of the New York Times. His latest book is The Big Cheat, How Donald Trump Fleeced America and Enriched Himself and His Family. He's also a professor at the Rochester Institute of Technology and the co-founder of dcreport.org, where his latest article is The Ex-Prince and the President. We're going to take a brief station break and back discussing the age of kleptocracy, geopolitical power, and private gain. Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Alexander Cooley, who's the former director of Columbia University's Harriman Institute for the Study of Russia, Eurasia, and Eastern Europe, and the Claire Tao Professor of Political Science at Barnard College of Columbia University. His books include Great Games, Local Rules, The New Great Power Contest in Central Asia, Dictators Without Borders, Power and Money in Central Asia, and Exit from Hegemony, The Unraveling of the American Global Order. And he has an article at Foreign Affairs, The Age of Kleptocracy, Geopolitical Power, Private Gain. Welcome to Background Briefing, Alexander Cooley.
Thank you, Ian. It's good to be with you.
Well, thanks for joining us. And you make the case in your article with Daniel Nexon at Foreign Affairs, The Age of Kleptocracy, Geopolitical Power, Private Gain, that unlike all of Trump's predecessors, the Trump administration has destroyed the premise of a government and an administration working in the U.S.'s core national interest. Instead, The Trump administration, however, has destroyed this premise, and Trump has instead wielded U.S. foreign policy principally to increase his own wealth, bolster his status, and personally benefit a small circle of family members, friends, and loyalists. And you also go on to suggest that this is a broader global problem with a patrimonial wave that has swept across countries such as Hungary, Israel, Russia, and Turkey. Interestingly enough, Alexander, on the last day of Obama's day in office, he invited the press into the Oval Office for a chat, and he was asked what he thought was the biggest challenge facing his successors, and he said Putinism. And they said, "What do you mean by Putinism?" And he said, "I mean Putin, I mean Erdogan, I mean Orban, and I mean Netanyahu." So he named it exactly as you have.
Yeah, so we are not used to seeing this in the US in terms of the fusing of personal political power and then wanting to use the power of the state for private interests. And this is what this article lays out, that because the Trump administration claimed that it was now for a transactional foreign policy, a coalition of different foreign policy and security professionals were okay with that or openly supported that, right? And they imagined and they justified transactional foreign policy being a non-liberal foreign policy, right? A policy that is all about pursuing core national interests, right? Be it in conflict mediation, be it in foreign economic policy, national security policy. What we've gotten instead is actually the dismantling of the very institutions that determine the national interest. And instead, we have gotten the Trump administration, a small circle, using foreign policy and national security interests to reward themselves, their inner circle, and political supporters.
But it's worse than that, isn't it? In as much as you say that under Trump, kleptocracy and ideology are inextricably entwined. And if Trump, who is clearly ailing, is succeeded by J.D. Vance and presumably Stephen Miller will still be around, you'll have a combination of kleptocracy and sort of ethno-nationalism.
Yeah, that's right. And so the other dimension of this in the particular case of Trump is the use of this kind of transactional kleptocratic foreign policy in cahoots with transnational right-wing and sort of ethno-nationalist types of goals. So, perhaps we can give a couple of examples here of the kinds of forms and the kinds of things that we're seeing. So the very first trip that Trump took overseas was to the Arabian Gulf. He visited Qatar, the UAE, Saudi Arabia. And in all three of these cases, there were the announcements of really large packages that were framed as being investments in the American worker, in the American interest, with very high unverified amounts, 600 billion, 1 trillion, 1.2 trillion. In reality, these packages bundled a number of commercial agreements, government to government agreements, and private arrangements for the Trump family that included the gift of a luxury Boeing liner from Qatar, real estate deals and licensing agreements for Trump properties and golf courses, and then a very suspicious crypto deal involving a crypto firm that was set up prior to the election by the Trump family and the Witkoff family, and then an investment a couple of days before the inauguration by the main player in the UAE Sovereign Wealth Fund, acquiring 49% for $500 million. And so what you see is our inability to scrutinize, right, any one of these pieces because they're all bundled together, right, and labeled this is a transaction, this is a deal that's great for the American people, right? So this is the mode that they operate. The other part of this, Ian, and this is sort of the concern about the fusion of kleptocracy for ideological and partisan political benefits is the complete stripping and gutting of enforcement of all major anti-corruption legislation that we have, whether it's the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, right? Whether it's the Corporate Transparency Act that, prior to Trump coming into office, basically banned the use of anonymous shell companies, right, for sort of US citizens, whether it's enforcement on crypto. Now, what we have is a situation where political allies can freely move money, right, funded by overseas sources, by billionaires, by oligarchs, right, without any scrutiny and no accountability either, right? And so when you say, the warning about we're going into Putinism, this is also what Putinism is, right? It is the control of finances and the lack of enforcement of any kind of corruption on a grand sort of national scale.
Well, Witkoff, of course, is a real estate friend of Trump's with no prior diplomatic experience. He was actually a slumlord who went into business with Len Blavatnik, who is one of Putin's bagmen. So he's not exactly neutral in terms of having a pro-Russian bias. And his sons have formed a crypto company called World Liberty Finance, along with Trump's three sons. So that is underway, and apparently, along with Jared Kushner, Witkoff has been the chief negotiator for all of the major theaters. We don't have a State Department anymore. We have these non-diplomats, which is pretty extraordinary in itself, and they've got their eyes on the $300 billion of frozen Russian central bank assets in this deal. They're talking about in Geneva a $12 trillion deal, which is what, 6 times Russia's GDP. It seems absolutely ridiculous and unrealistic. Already, the chief Russian negotiator, Vladimir Medinsky, who's a Russian nationalist out of the Dugin kind of world, there's some public clash now between him and Lavrov, because Lavrov thinks that the money side of it is ridiculous, and he's more concerned about the military and geopolitical side of it. So on the Russian side, you've got some friction going on.
Yeah, that's right. So let's break down a little bit those excellent points that you made. First of all, on Witkoff, it's not unusual, right, for presidents to appoint special envoys, right, or even to appoint ambassadors on a pay-to-play kind of basis. Big donors get ambassadorships. What is unusual is exactly that Witkoff was a personal friend without any diplomatic experience, and that he's been given almost every single important negotiating portfolio in the Middle East, right? Whether it's Iran, whether it's the Arabian Gulf countries, Gaza, also Ukraine, right? And Russia. And so he oftentimes he chooses to appear without an interpreter, right? Without the inputs and support, right, of sort of State Department and sort of its bureaucratic, traditional bureaucratic sort of inputs and preparations, right? And so what you're seeing in a place like Ukraine is the fusing of three distinct things, right? A conflict resolution process that supposedly the U.S. is mediating, U.S. national interest in wanting to push an agreement that is favorable to the US and its allies. And then the third dimension that you mentioned, sort of personal business interests, right? These funds that were frozen, these Russian central bank funds that were frozen after its investment of Ukraine, the talk and the debate and some of the legislative action has been over how to allow Ukraine to use these funds for its reconstruction purposes. Now they're being dangled by the Russians to Witkoff and to Kushner as the basis, right, of some sort of US-Russian economic bonanza. But just for the purpose of your background, Ian, for your listeners, US-Russian economic cooperation historically has been quite low. That's because they don't have a lot of complementarity in their economies, right? So trade has been usually in the 20, 30 billion type of range before. And so all this talk of trillions of dollars of sort of investments, to me, this is a clear attempt for the Russians to dangle a shiny object, knowing what makes this team tick to have them put pressure on the Ukrainians and come up with a set of arrangements that are highly favorable to Moscow. And you're right, Lavrov, who is the senior foreign affairs minister, right, and diplomat, is actually also quite appalled by this, right? Because you're seeing this internal factionalism between the investment and sovereign wealth side in Russia and the foreign affairs side. So, yes, this is private interest par excellence, grafting themselves onto what's supposed to be a national process. In this case, this sort of conflict mediation, conflict resolution talks.
So, Alexander, given that there's this massive US military force off Iran and the clock is ticking on whether or not they can make a deal, again, you've got Witkoff and Kushner making the deal. My sense is, as much as there's an alarmism about if you put that much military assets in, at some point or other you're going to have to use them. I think conversely, Trump is so obsessed with Obama and his Nobel Peace Prize that he'll make any kind of deal, and a bad one at that. So where do you think this is heading? Because, again, you point out that it's not just about kleptocracy, it's also about personal aggrandizement.
Yeah, absolutely. So Trump has actually used the Peace Prize, I think, strategically to also deflect from the fact that a lot of these conflict resolution settlements, right, also involve real spoils for Trump allies and family members, right? Some are like DRC in Congo, for instance, or Ukraine. And so the Peace Prize is personal aggrandizement. It's also a deflection strategy, right? To sort of try and avoid scrutiny. In terms of Iran, we have never seen this amount of air power be put in a position and not be used. And this is the concern. Either way, this is unprecedented. Either we go to war on a pretext without any kind of clear articulation of what it is that we are seeking, why military force is urgent and necessary, or this is all one massively dangerous and expensive bargaining strategy to try and extract concessions, right? And maybe there is another kind of dimension to this too that will involve some sort of personal control. Remember with Venezuela, right? Venezuelan oil gets sold in a bank account that is controlled by Trump himself, based in Qatar, right? So we don't know what these actual arrangements might be. But again, the point is, this is all very murky, and we are deploying the instruments of the most powerful country in the world without clear purpose, without clear rationale, and clearly without inputs from national security professionals.
And in a way, it's just in closing, it sort of ties in with Epstein in the sense that you've got immunity and impunity. The Supreme Court's given him immunity and he acts with impunity, as do his friends who, in effect, he's covering up for. So
yeah, there's a Supreme Court dimension to this too for Trump himself. There's also a kind of convenient loophole here because Witkoff or even Kushner are not formal government employees. They don't actually have to be held to just basic requirements like disclosing their conflicts of interest or their financial assets, right? They're really above scrutiny and accountability, right? And so this is another reason why, placing foreign policy and national security decision making outside of the boundaries of sort of government officials and confirmed and appointed officials is really uncharted territory. And the whole question of how they might be scrutinized and held to account is very much an open one.
Well, Alexander Cooley, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Ian.
And again, I've been speaking with Alexander Cooley, who's the former director of Columbia University's Harriman Institute for the Study of Russia, Eurasia, and Eastern Europe, and the Claire Tow Professor of Political Science at Barnard College of Columbia University. His books include Great Games, Local Rules, The New Great Power Contest in Central Asia, Dictators Without Borders, Power and Money in Central Asia, and Exit from Hegemony, The Unraveling of the American Global Order, and he has an article at Foreign Affairs, The Age of Kleptocracy, Geopolitical Power, Private Gain. And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon, Asher Price, and Sasha Linden-Cohen. If you missed any of today's program and would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we include extended interviews, searchable by topic, and have made it easier for you to sign up for daily email updates and provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on these platforms. Find us on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Facebook at Ian Masters Media, and our new social media manager, Luke Susswood, is also posting highlights from the show on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at Ian Masters Media. So please do help us reach more listeners by sharing this program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help sustain this program into the future and ensure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate and/or at publictruthmedia.org, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back tomorrow with another Background Briefing at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.
One more